Have you ever tried and failed with a nutrition plan? I want you to know that it may not be your fault. Repeat after me. It's not my fault. It's not my fault.
Your fault. No, it's not your fault. All right? It's not your fault.
Now, if you've ever tried to coach someone through nutrition and you both failed, well, it probably was partially your fault. I'm just being honest. Creating new habits, and I think where most people just completely miss the boat, is that it's very personalized. Most nutrition modifications are too robust and they're too generalized that it ends up not working. Now, not always. Okay, sometimes. Okay, most of the time. Not because the logic is off, but because it's too much, too soon, and this aggression will not stand, man.
No, I do mind. The dude minds. This will not stand, you know? This aggression will not stand, man.
And so because nutrition and sleep are the only unavoidable habits that we have, it means you have to do them as long as you live. It makes sense that we would start incredibly small, incredibly basic, and personalized from day one. Now, personalization, I think, is a buzzword that will just continue to be prevalent in health and fitness and probably any personal services industry. And the key to personalization is to ask questions. Instead of telling somebody what to do, ask them what they would like to focus on. There's a lot of methods when it comes to dialing in quantity and quality of nutrients. We have some leeway. That means that you have more options than you realize, and there isn't just one way that you have to do this. So there's 5 questions that you can ask yourself, you can ask your client. Based on those answers, I will give you a framework, since I don't know you, that should be a great start in assessing, prioritizing, and personalizing. Now, I want to reiterate every time that you go about personalization, it's going to be based on a few things. It's going to be based on habits, it's going to be based on environment, and it's going to be based on mindset. When we say habits, it's helpful to understand what are they already doing? Where are they already going? Environment is asking what are the characteristics of where they find themselves? And then mindset is something that often doesn't get talked about, but it's what do they believe and what are they telling themselves or rationalizing as they're consuming food. Now, these 5 areas of personalization are questions that we've come up with. It's not all encompassing, but for something that is so overwhelming and can often be so confusing like nutrition, it is a way for us to make sense of it. These 5 questions for us are around protein intake, or the quantity of food that people are consuming. It's around food sensitivities, or the quality of food that people are consuming. It's around timing, it's around planning, and it's around food hygiene or meal consumption. Now, each one of these areas, if focused on, would improve someone's body composition and optimize their caloric intake. How do I know that? Well, because we have personalized by just focusing on one, and we have seen people have tremendous results. So it does not have to be that complicated. And at this point, I'd love to break down each one of those ways that you could assess and ultimately arrive at a place that you would want to focus on. And that focus is where we would start to make things very simple, very basic, and then iterate from there. So when we talk about protein intake, or the amount of protein, it's a question that we think is incredibly insightful to understand where people find themselves along a continuum of how accurate and precise that they are. Protein isn't the only macronutrient that you can measure, but we found that if we ask this question and people have a very detailed answer, it's probably not where we could see the most ground taken or where we would see the most improvement. On the contrary, though, if we ask this question and they say, well, what's a protein? We know this is a great place where we could probably start basic and people could see great results. The question we ask is, hey, describe to me the amount of protein you get on a daily basis. Tell me in as much detail as possible what that looks like. So again, if somebody says, well, I start at 7:49 a.m. I have 4 farm-to-table ostrich eggs that I saute along with 3 ounces of grass-fed bison. You already know that they're talking about something that they're really excited about. And excitement means that they're probably really fixated on it. And so we can move on to something else. Now, if the answer on the other extreme is, hey, what's a protein? Hey, does peas count? Then you know that this is a lack of awareness and a lack of that prioritization for that macronutrient. Now, if this is you, or if this is the client that you're working with, and they don't even have basic awareness of what this is, then we're going to start really small. We're going to start with education. We're going to start with simple wins. An atypical approach may look like factoring in their lifestyle, what do they do for work, what are their family commitments, and identifying easy protein additions that are already available and accessible to them. One of the best methods that we've found is for people to not bring out a scale or a cup, but to look at the size of the palm of their hand and measure protein based on that convenient, always with you metric on the type of proteins that they have available. A lot of times we won't even start with all meals, but we'll start with one meal and just see if they can eat that same consistent thing that they like that has protein every time that they're sitting down for that meal. Now, the second question is around food sensitivity, and this one sometimes throws people off because there's lots of ways that we could talk about the quality of food that people are consuming. But there's millions of people that have some type of food sensitivity, food allergy. And so asking this question is basically just opening the door to see how aware they are to the sensitivities that they might have. We have found a very strong correlation to those that are aware of their sensitivities and the quality of nutrients, i.e. the amount of micronutrients, vitamins, and minerals that they're getting on a regular basis. The question sounds like this. Hey, tell me what you know about your own food and sensitivities. Do you know of any intolerances or allergies? If so, how strict are you to adhering to those sensitivities? They'll answer that in one of 3 ways. I have no idea what you're talking about, which means, hey, we could probably do some investigating to see if there is anything that you're sensitive to. On the other end of the spectrum, they could say that they're incredibly adherent and they know that the inclusion of some of these things, whether it be dairy, legumes, grains, isn't good for them. And at that point, we probably know we can move on to something else. But let's say that you answered that question and it's not applicable, or your adherence rate is somewhere in like 50-50. And a typical approach might be some experimentation where we identify specific foods and just document how they make us feel. Keeping a little food log, and it doesn't have to be incredibly robust or complicated, but keeping some notation of how food makes us feel from an energy standpoint, maybe from an inflammation standpoint, maybe even a few hours later from a gut sensitivity standpoint, can empower them to make this connection between food and well-being. And from there, you can iterate on to potentially limiting that intake or prioritizing certain qualities of nutrition. Now, the next question is around meal timing. Now, there's lots of extreme ways that we can eat where we would potentially restrict the amount of food that I'm eating. Further, I would restrict the window with which I can consume that food, or I would mandate certain hours where I shouldn't be eating. But for most people, most of the time, as a starting point, we want to make sure that they're consuming food on a regular basis. I like to say that I can take anybody with the highest level of motivation and discipline, and if I could starve you for 2 days and deprive you of sleep, I can set any type of food in front of you, and I like my chances of you consuming it. So for most of us, when we're talking about timing, we want to see that there is a frequency of meal that doesn't exceed more than 5 hours without justification. If we ask this question, hey, walk me through a day of eating with regards to timing of meals, when are you eating, and what do those meals typically look like? If their answer is, man, I don't know when I eat, we know that this is where we can potentially make some huge improvements. If they go into great levels of detail about every 3 to 5 hours they're having a meal, and they describe to you in rich color what that looks like, hey, we probably can move on. If you are one that has an irregular meal timing, this often highlights challenges with planning, maybe hunger awareness, or even environmental stressors. And so an approach could be to potentially plan in some bridge snacks as a solution rather than rigid meal timing rules. This could be just being aware of the difference between being tired and being hungry, documentation of when there was some correlation to environmental stressors and when I consumed food, and then what were some of the correlates to me skipping meals or missing meals, and what could I do to potentially make some little tweaks and changes to that. Now, the fourth of 5 questions is surrounding meal prepping and planning. We ask, now I'm curious, what does food prep or planning look like for you? What percentage of your diet is pre-planned? If someone says that 100% of the time they're just winging it, I don't like their chances of always being able to eat the right quality and quantity of food. If on the other end they say, man, the majority of my meals are pre-planned, every Sunday I plan out what this looks like, or we cook chicken in a large batch, or every day I'm planning what my leftovers were from last night and factoring them to the next meal, or hey, every day I'm looking at where I'll eat out with clients and I'm looking at the menu. Anything that they say that looks like that, I like their chances of having enough planning to make good choices. So if you're someone that finds that you have no strategy for planning, we don't have to buy 12 pounds of chicken and start cooking that on Sunday. But even just asking the question like, hey, what would be a really simple thing that we could plan ahead on? What's something that is static in your schedule that you know you can count on? Are you always eating out at lunch? Are there always leftovers from dinner? Do you always have access to the same staples of food for breakfast? And just based on the answers to that simple question, we can start to dial in one part of their day where we could just anticipate might be the same every single time that we eat. That is planning, even if it is planning to eat the same thing. Now, the very last question is around meal consumption. It's around food hygiene. And we ask, what meals look like from an environmental standpoint? How long does a meal typically last for you on average? Now, if somebody says, I have no idea, I've never thought to time how long it takes, well, hey, this might be something that we can work on. If on the other extreme, they say, oh man, it's always, I love mealtime. I love to slow down. I love to sit down. It's always going to take me more than 15 minutes. Greater than 15 minutes means that this probably isn't the bottleneck. If this is something that you've never thought about, slowing down will correlate to eating less food. There's hormones at play that when we take enough time, they're released to let us know that we're satiated. They're released to let us know that we have had enough to eat. And so meal environments, speed are often overlooked, but they do play a significant role in digestion, in stress, and in paying attention to what you're eating. So an atypical approach, if this is something that you struggle with, is introducing very simple practices, simple but not easy, like setting a utensil down between bites, sitting down instead of standing up or while you're doing some other task like driving, chewing thoroughly, counting the number of bites. These highlight the link between stress, rapid eating, and digestion. And so the point of all of these questions is just to have some heads up of what you think's in limited supply for yourself or for your client. More importantly than deciding what's in limited supply is deciding what you're willing to change, what you're willing to focus on. I'm convinced that most of the reason that nutrition doesn't work is because people are opting in to change something that they're actually not ready for. So instead of saying, hey, what in these 5 questions feels devastatingly difficult, maybe the question is, hey, what do you feel like if we made this change here, it would be no change at all to you? You could do this without even thinking about it, but know that it would be a really great step in the right direction for your health. I've had clients reverse type 2 diabetes by focusing on getting enough protein. I've had a client lose 100 pounds ne'er to return just by planning out what they're going to eat. I don't know why that was the thing. When I look back at all these questions we asked, I don't even know why that was the area that we started in, but it was just an area that they felt very confident that they could do something about. If you're a coach, stop recommending diets. Stop telling people to do some wholesale elimination of a macronutrient, or to weigh and measure foods in a way that only works for people who eat out of a Tupperware and work in a gym. Start assessing and prioritizing one of two areas to start. Don't try to fix everything. Personalize. This means integrate changes into their routine rather than adding more stress. Celebrate these small wins because they won't think that it's a big deal. They need you to affirm that it's a huge deal, that for 1 week they did something 5 times. That's a 500% improvement than the week before. They need attention. They need a reminder that what they're doing is awesome. You've just dialed these habits back to be so seemingly insignificant that they don't feel like that. Iterate this process and come back to this inquiry of these 5 questions and beyond until you feel like mastery is achieved. Mastery is where they can do it without even thinking about it. Are you interested in doing this for yourself? Subscribe, reach out to us in the link provided in the description, and we'll fix you right up. This has been a monumental statement about incremental change brought to you by the good people at BPR.